morning, Mel Kriegsman. I have always considered you to be like an ambassador, not only for Jewish Greensboro, which I think you were for my family and me when we came here, but really also for Greensboro as a whole. And just it's fantastic. You know, today is such a beautiful day here in Greensboro. It is an early fall day, and I consider this to be one of the reasons why we live here. It just feels so beautiful.
I think a lot of people felt the same way and feel the same way.
Yeah, and of course Temple Emmanuel. You know, this
Absolutely.
is such a bright star in this community, an institution in this community.
It really is.
So your family goes back here a long time. You go back here a long time. Tell us a little bit about your family connection.
Well, my family came in the 1920s. My uncle and my father. My father came a year or two after my uncle. There was an ad in New York, and evidently a furrier magazine that a furrier in Greensboro needed help. So my uncle moved here. My understanding was 1924 and 1925. A few years later, my uncle called his brother, my father, Max Jacob, and said, "Hey, Greensboro's a nice place to live. It's got a great Jewish community. Come on down." And so he came down, my understanding, approximately 1928.
Right.
And they formed Kriegsman Brothers, which were furriers.
Right.
In fact, the Greensboro name goes back to Europe to the 1870s. They were furriers.
Wow.
And so that's how they got to Greensboro. Now, my father left sometime around 1929 or 30. There wasn't enough money during the Depression to support two families. So he moved back to New York City, went back in the fur business there, married my mother, Sophie, and they came back down. That was in 1931 they were married.
Okay.
And came back down in 43 with my brother, who's deceased, and I was 3 years old. So I'm 81, so I've lived in Greensboro 78 years. I can still remember wearing my knicker pants. I don't know if anybody knows what knicker pants are.
I've seen them on the golf course.
Okay, well this goes back to the 1940s. They were very much in style.
Yeah.
And when you walked, they whistled.
How about that?
And I wore them to the temple, as I remember.
And that was for religious school.
That was for religious school.
Wow.
That's correct.
Paint a picture of what things were like back then in religious school and temple in general in the 1940s.
And when you go back that far, and you know you're 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age, it's vague.
Right.
I mean, I do remember going. I do remember attending Sunday school. I do remember after Sunday school, my father would go buy Hams and get a New York Times.
Right. Ham's, just so people know, is a restaurant.
It was a restaurant.
Yeah.
It is a restaurant. It was the
Right,
Freiberg
right.
family.
Yep.
And then Miss Fine had a delicatessen
Yeah.
on Spring Garden Street. I didn't know if you were aware of that.
Okay, I've heard the name.
Okay. And she had 2 sons.
Yeah.
And they had a deli downtown.
Downtown, right.
Mush and Eli.
Right.
Okay. And then we go by there to pick up some goodies. Amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Again, this is in the 1940s during World War II.
Uh-huh.
It was interesting times. You know, Rabbi, I remember only one phone call, and I think I was probably about 6 years old. We got a call from someone, I believe they were in England. And they wanted to get, let's see, it was either 46 or 47. And my mother and father spoke Yiddish.
Okay.
So they spoke Yiddish on the phone. But after that conversation, it was something about he wanted to leave Europe. He was afraid. Of course, it was after the war.
After the war.
But after that, we never heard from any other family that lived there, whether they got out of the Holocaust or not.
Right.
Of course, after that, I attended Sunday school. I was bar mitzvahed in 1953
Right.
here at the temple. Confirmed a couple of years later. Okay. Got married in the Sternberger room the first time. The second time, a number of years later, I married Carmen.
Right.
Okay. And with Rabbi Rick, I call him.
Okay.
All right. And have been a member of Temple for, that goes like 78 years, I guess.
Wow.
So I guess you could take me off of the new member list.
No, listen. but you meet someone when you're, what was it? In your early years here.
Yeah, the Sunday school. One of my best friends. Can I mention his name?
If you want to, I know.
There were quite a few.
Yeah.
And most of them are still with us.
Right.
I mean, I remember, picking up Ben Marks and bless him.
God bless him.
And other Jewish families that had been here a long time. I remember a lot of them had stores downtown Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, Rabbi, as young adults, now I went to Chapel Hill for a few years. My father died when I was 19, and my uncle died a few years later. That's Bobby and Jackie and Kenneth's father,
right.
and David and Jane.
Sure.
David Kriegsman.
Right.
So he died. They both died in their 50s.
Very young.
Eventually, David took over the business. And again, Kriegsman Furs and Outerwear have been here for over 90 years, 93, 94 years.
Right.
Now, there's only a couple of retailers been here longer than that. One of them, of course, is Shipments.
Sure.
Of course, Yum Yum.
Right. Over by the university.
And also Stanley's Barbecue.
How about that?
That have been here almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And Yum Yum's over 100 years.
Right.
I do remember after the war, being Jewish, belonging to Temple Emmanuel, in the 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Was interesting times because people related to the Holocaust, they related to Hitler, but in some cases they didn't know necessarily how to respond to people of the Jewish faith.
Right. And so what was that like here?
Well, I don't remember discrimination.
Right.
Okay? I believe my father and my mother, who again were immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
and citizens,
Mm-hmm.
both coming through Ellis Island. By the way, my mother was born in Russia.
Okay.
And my father was born in Europe. And I'm assuming, growing up, I didn't really remember, but people have told me they had the typical European accent.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my father and my uncle being in business, it was a name that was well known.
Okay.
But I don't remember discrimination. I do remember people talking about it. But of course, to a lot of young people, it was just something they heard on the radio, maybe have read the newspaper, and listened to their parents talk about it. So I was fortunate enough that I went to Lindley Elementary School,
Mm-hmm.
Lindley Junior,
Yeah.
and graduated from, at that time, Greensboro High School.
Right. Now Grimsley.
Now Grimsley, that's correct. I went down to Chapel Hill for a couple of years and some education there. And my father died a year or so before that.
Yeah.
And that kind of changed the dynamics.
Right.
Okay.
And you came back to the area after
Oh
that?
yeah, never left the area. I go to Chapel Hill, worked down there. I worked at a men's clothing store called The Hub.
Yep. Of the
Okay.
Tager family.
Tager family. And that was owned by Bob Rosenbacher and Henry
Yeah. Yeah.
in Chapel Hill. I worked there. And that was in the Ivy League button-down, Madras shirt, penny loafers day.
Yeah.
And, Greensboro was thriving. We had tobacco, we had textiles,
Right.
and it was a jumping place.
Mm-hmm.
It still is, but in a different way today.
Yeah.
And by the way, something that always comes up when I look back at those days, there was a drugstore like Happy Days. Did you ever see Happy Days on
Of course,
TV?
of course,
Okay.
yeah.
On the corner of Spring Garden and Howard.
Okay.
Wolf's Soda Shop was just like it was on TV, except I don't remember the fonts.
Okay. Listen, if you don't remember the Fonz, maybe you were the Fonz.
No,
so
I
I'm
wasn't.
just saying,
It was
pretty
that,
cool, Mel.
It was that kind of place.
Right, right.
It's interesting.
And so it was a place where people would gather. You were what, high school or
I was at Lilly
college?
Junior,
You were
Junior High.
junior
then.
high.
Yeah. And
And so people would come by, they'd,
well, it was a
order
walk.
something to eat
It was
and
only a
hang
few.
out.
Yeah, it was only a few blocks away
Right,
from Spring Garden Street, where Lilly Junior was.
right.
Now, also in those days of interest, the Jewish fraternities in Chapel Hill,
Mm-hmm.
we also had a Hill House there,
Right.
would come to Greensboro to see and date the females at UNC.
Right. Because it was a women's college.
It was a women's college at the
Yeah.
time, no men. In fact, when I was in Chapel Hill, I think there were 200 females.
Right.
Now it's kind of reversed.
Correct. I think there's more women than there are men
Right.
there.
Now, back in those days at Temple, like I was bar mitzvahed on Friday night.
Yeah. Okay.
I went bar mitzvahed on Saturday. I don't recall a lot of services on Saturday morning at that time,
Okay.
being a member on Green Street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In fact, I've looked up and I've talked to my friend Mr. Gray,
Right.
okay, Sydney,
Sure.
who owns buildings downtown, and he keeps telling me that the first temple was on Lee Street, which I knew.
Right.
But anyway, so Greensboro was a great town. We had a lot of Jewish doctors at that time. Of course, Stella Bowers, we were talking about Gene and Sam and Joe's father, Sidney, and his brother Maurice.
Right.
In fact, they were family doctors. And then, of course, Eagle was formed by 4 Jewish doctors, as you probably know.
Right.
Okay. So, and the temple was just part of my life. It still is today. You know, I remember Lad Landau, Dr. Landau, Jerry Hyman, and I.
Sure.
We ran the Boy Scout troop. I don't even know if you knew we had a Boy Scout.
I did, and in fact, Edgar Marx has told me a number of times about it. So.
Yeah, well, we had the Boy Scout troop,
Yeah.
and we met in the basement.
Correct.
Over at Temple Emmanuel.
Yeah.
So that was interesting times. It was a rather large troop, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it continued after I was involved in it.
Yeah.
You know, then always Bobby and I were thinking, because Bobby's my first cousin.
Sure.
I was thinking back to when we became ushers at the high holidays.
Right.
I do remember Arnold Marks, and I do not remember Changey before that.
Okay.
And to the best of my recollection, now Jackie and Bobby were before me, but they're older than I. Jackie died at 90 or 91 just recently.
Just recently, yeah.
Yes. And Bobby still, as you know, is an usher, and I am.
Yeah.
And I believe it goes back for me 30 to 40 years, and for Bobby maybe even longer.
Yeah,
And
I love the work that I gotta appreciate all that everybody who's one of our ushers on the high holidays does. You guys are amazing.
Well,
You
I
really are.
think the whole group is.
Yeah, it's like this
And-
big welcome crew. You
Well,
know?
it's a smiling face.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, and a shake, and then
Yeah.
a hug, and all that.
Yeah.
And it's just a very friendly, good time.
Yeah, Mel, you are such an incredible source of the history of the past of Temple, Emmanuel. I want you to talk for a moment about some of the changes that you've seen over the years.
Oh, gracious. Well, first of all, physically we changed.
Yeah.
You know, from Green Street to here,
Right.
which in my opinion was a great move. And you're telling me, or my understanding is that's about 20 years ago?
Yeah, it'll be 20 years, not now, but a year from now, high holidays, when this facility was formally opened.
What a great move.
Yeah.
What a great
It
reason.
it predated my arrival in
Yeah.
Greensboro, but Rabbi Gutman's leadership and others who were here, made this new facility.
Well,
a Jewish
obviously,
facility.
it wasn't an easy decision,
That's what I understand.
because some of the older members from the 1920s, or even maybe earlier than
Right.
that, had such love for the Green Street.
Oh, sure.
But I do remember one of the decisions is Bobby and I were on a committee to look at land in and around the Green Street.
Mhm.
But then it turned out reasonably, if you were going to buy something that was 60, 80, 90 years old,
Mhm.
with possibly some environmental things, buried oil tanks and so forth, buy it, tear it down, clean it up. It just made good sense to buy the 10 acres we have here.
Yeah. What was here? I mean, what was here where
Well, this was
the
all
Jefferson campus is now?
This was all owned by Jefferson.
Yeah.
They owned several hundred acres.
Right.
And then when they sold,
Mhm.
they were bought out, they merged or whatever the word
Yeah.
is. They decided that the land needed to be sold,
Yeah.
okay, for the benefit of stockholders as
Right.
a non-performing asset.
Right.
And so that's when the Starmount Company decided to buy the land.
Right.
That's how they built all these big houses behind. That was all Starmount Company.
Right.
My understanding is we bought this with the help of the Starmount Company
Okay.
and the negotiations through them or with them,
Yeah.
with the Jefferson Pilot Life Insurance Company. What a great move, what a great location
Yeah, it's incredible.
and everything. Yeah, it was
We
the
have
right
this,
time.
we have our historic campus that we, again, through COVID, really have not been able to use.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been a real boost. And have you seen how activity has shifted, or?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
much more active. Oh, a whole lot active.
yeah,
And I'll leave that to Rabbi Gutman, and to you.
yeah. Well, thank you.
You re-stimulated the local Jewish population.
So let me ask you this: in terms of the people that you meet along the way,
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine there have been times that there have been more or less people that are moving to the area. So we're in the middle of this pandemic now. We
Yeah.
know what's going on in some of the bigger cities. Are you seeing that people are looking to relocate or move back home to Greensboro? I mean, how are you seeing those things these days?
Not like it was, let's just say, when we were textiles.
Right.
A lot of the people that moved to this area, textiles.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that moved to this area were furniture people.
Sure.
And those industries are no longer here. I can't say that they're not Jewish people now that when they make airplanes,
Right.
out of Honda Jet.
Right.
But when we were textiles and that, we had more people moving there.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to very strongly have a lot of people in the medical field
Right.
back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s moved to Greensboro.
Yeah.
Partially because in the 50s of Moses Cone,
Right.
also, in Winston, the hospital. Duke has always been a big thing, in Chapel Hill. But yeah, I see people, some moving back. I would say that is great, not as great as I would like it to be. Families coming back together. But it's 2 generations or 3 generations later.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing how many roads and how many paths come through Greensboro, North Carolina, and have connections to this area and to Emmanuel in particular. But I hear something in what you're saying, maybe for people who are looking for opportunities. We got a plan going.
Yeah, got it.
Which, interestingly, if I'm So let me start that again.
It's like it's circling us or something.
I know it's having a good time out there. The airplane. If I hear what you're saying, there are opportunities for people who would want to make this area their home. Yes, at one point you could say that it was the textile industry, it might have been tobacco in the Winston area, maybe furniture in the broader area. But it seems like in healthcare, there are tremendous opportunities
Yes.
here. In addition, Honda Jet and aviation, maybe in terms of universities and some of the other developments here, or there's other things that are waiting to be pioneered here. Infrastructure-wise, you've got that road, the major artery going around Greensboro right now, but I think it's also to bring people into Greensboro. It would seem that you could use your imagination, your creative imagination, and say that this is an area that's ripe for growth or a next phase.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you also, we're very fortunate when you give the thing about Greensboro, besides the parks and the university systems,
Sure.
okay? And that kind of thing, it draws people here. Now, as you know, there's a big draw to Raleigh and a big draw to Charlotte, the 2 bigger cities. But there's a big draw because of the way of life here.
Yeah, I think that's
And
one
we're
of
very
the
fortunate to have, Temple Emmanuel.
right.
And if someone wants to be more conservative or orthodox,
Right, we've
that's
got
available
options.
to
Sure,
them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a good place to be Jewish.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Mel, is there one story that sticks out about growing up Jewish here?
Not going to Sunday school,
Yeah,
that was big.
yeah,
And then the typical thing of going home and having lunch.
yeah.
My father took the typical nap. Sunday afternoon,
Right.
the New York Times was beside the chair
Yeah.
for at least a week, turned yellow.
Yeah, right. I know. I used to have that in college.
And then if I was good, if I was a good kid,
Yeah,
he'd take us to Yum Yum,
yeah.
ice cream,
Great.
which is interesting. But Sundays, that was a typical Sunday.
Yeah.
That was a typical Sunday school. We dropped off the kids that we picked up, the other kids, and they dropped us off. And I can mention a lot of names that you would recognize that we did that too. And they did it to us. They pick us up.
Let me bring you back also, because I think you would have been here at the time. Take us to February of 1960. I'm wondering if you have recollections of the start of the sit-ins at the Woolworths,
Oh, yeah.
and if you have recollections of Rabbi Asher on the beam at the time,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the things that were being said or talked about. And I know everybody, makes this out like, this was universally accepted. I think I can imagine that.
Talking about segregation.
Well, not segregation per se, but the
Sit-ins at
the
the
sit-ins
Woolworths.
and the protests against that.
Yes.
And then the next move to the next moves to end segregation.
Well, I worked at that time at Ella Stone's. I sold shoes.
Mhm.
I was a teenager.
Right.
Okay.
Relative to downtown, where is that?
Directly, it was Tallheimers after that.
Okay.
Directly across the street from Woolworths.
Oh, okay.
Woolworths is here, Tallheimers there, Myers Department Store there, Prego Guys.
Prego Guys, right? And we know the story of Leonard.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
yes. So that was right there, and yes, I remember the sit-ins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I really do. From a perspective, I thought it was time.
Yeah.
It was time. Not necessarily for that particular thing, but for the movement
Mm-hmm.
that all of us are equal. We all, we're all God's children.
Yeah.
And but then there were a lot of people who were used to the old days. I remember the separate bathrooms. And I remember the separate fountains. Okay. And I remember people saying, they rode through certain parts of town. Unfortunately, they locked their doors.
Right.
Things of that nature. But that's part of history.
Yeah.
That's part of history.
What was the message from the pulpit at that time?
Exactly what I just said.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
It was
the right
time.
thing.
Yeah.
It was time. It was the right thing. Yeah. And of course it is. But again, you grow up and you live in a community, and the norms for that community at that time were changing, or did change. And that was one of the reasons for the change. And that sit-in moved that movement along.
Absolutely.
And that's just how it was. But you're going back 60 years?
60 years? Yeah, over 60,
60
years. Now.
years. We had the first TV.
We, meaning the
My
Kriegsmans?
family.
You had the first TV in the neighborhood?
Yep. When Channel 2 came on the air.
Channel 2 was what, public television? Or,
No,
it was
CBS.
CBS, yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing.
By the way, I can remember trolley cars.
That's amazing, Mel.
We had trolleys, I think there were either 6 or 7 routes for trolleys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The wire and the tracks. And I think the last one was, I think I was 15 or 16 years of age when he finally said no more trolleys.
Right. Just amazing. And yet now we're developing a next generation,
Buses that run on batteries.
buses that run on batteries. You've got an aircraft coming out of this area. And
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Mel, you've seen a lot over the years. I'm really grateful that you shared some
Well,
stories with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Chag Sameach to you and lots of blessings.
Thank you very much.